body was still warm when they found him. Stretched across the king-sized bed of the Echo Atlantic presidential suite, one arm hanging off the edge, his expensive Italian shoes still on his feet, his phone face down on the nightstand. Choi Jae-won, one of Lagos's most powerful construction magnates, was dead. No struggle, no scream, no last words to anyone who loved him. Just a man who had built towers that scraped the Lagos skyline, lying still in a hotel room that was not his home, next to a woman who was not his wife. The socialite who had been with him that night sat in this corner of the room with a towel wrapped around her shoulders, mascara bleeding down her face, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. She had called the front desk. She had not called his family. And when the hotel manager rushed in with 2 security guards and took one look at the man on the bed, he immediately knew this was not a situation you handled quietly. This was a situation that would set Lagos on fire. By the time the sun rose over the Lagos harbor, the news had already spread through the corridors of power like smoke through a cracked door. A Korean billionaire, dead in a hotel, under circumstances no one wanted to name out loud. And somewhere across the city, in a white colonial mansion in Victoria Island with a garden full of orchids and a driveway lined with black SUVs, a 16-year-old girl named Choi Soo-yeon was still asleep, completely unaware that the man she called her father would never walk through that front door again. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Choi Jae-won had come to Lagos 17 years ago with nothing more than a structural engineering degree from Seoul National University, a battered leather briefcase, and a hunger that most men his age had already given up on. He was 31 years old, lean and precise in the way that only men who had grown up poor and studied obsessively could be. Lagos, in his mind, was not a city. It was a construction site waiting to happen. He had read the projections. He had studied the infrastructure deficit reports. He had looked at maps of the Nigerian coastline and seen not chaos, but opportunity, the kind of opportunity that only revealed itself to people willing to look past the surface. Within 5 years, his company, JW Constructions Limited, had landed its first major government contract, a road rehabilitation project in Abuja worth $40 million. Within 10, he had built an empire that touched every corner of the Nigerian construction sector. Commercial towers in Victoria Island, bridge expansion projects in Rivers State, luxury residential estates in Lekki Phase 1 that sold out before the foundation was even complete. He was methodical, precise, and incorruptible in a business landscape where corruption was not just tolerated. It was the foundation on which everything else was built. That last quality was what made him both respected and dangerous in equal measure. His wife, Han Seo-yeon, was a Korean woman of equally formidable character. She had met Jae-won when they were both students, and she had believed in him before he believed in himself. She followed him to Lagos, learned the rhythms of the city, studied the culture with the same discipline she had applied to her economics degree, and built her own empire in maritime shipping. Her company, SY Maritime, controlled 3 cargo terminals along the Lagos waterfront and handled the logistics for some of the largest import and export operations in West Africa. Seoyeon was not a woman who stayed in her husband's shadow. She was the kind of woman who cast her own. To the outside world, they were the ultimate power couple. Korean precision married to Lagos ambition. A family that had conquered one of the most complex cities on earth by sheer force of intelligence and will. They had one daughter, Soo-yeon, named partly after her mother, and they gave her everything. International schools, cultural exposure, language lessons in Korean, English, and Igbo. A future so well prepared, it almost seemed inevitable. But behind the orchid garden and the black SUVs, the walls of the Choi marriage had been quietly cracking for years. Jae-won was a man who loved deeply, but controlled poorly. And in a city like Lagos, where beauty and temptation were as abundant as the traffic, he had stumbled more than once. Seoyeon knew, the way wives always know, not from evidence at first, but from a shift in energy, a change in schedule, an absence that arrives before the body does. She had confronted him twice. He had apologized twice. And she had chosen, both times, to hold the family together, not out of weakness, but out of strategy. She had a daughter to raise, a company to run, and a position in Lagos society she had earned with her own hands. Divorce, in her calculation, was a luxury she could not afford. What Jae-won did not know was that Seoyeon, in her loneliness and her quiet fury, had made a calculation of her own. But that story would not surface until much later. First, there was a funeral to plan. There was a daughter to tell. There was a city watching, and there was a young man named Emeka Okafor, sitting in a leather chair in his family's Ikoyi compound, watching the morning news with the calm, measured expression of someone who had been expecting exactly this. Soo-yeon was in her second year at Lagos British International Secondary School when the news broke. She had been at breakfast in the school canteen, laughing at something her best friend Adayes had said. When her mother's driver appeared at the school gate with red eyes and an expression Soo-yeon had never seen on his face before, he said nothing on the drive home. He just drove. And when the gates of the Victoria Island mansion opened, and she saw her mother standing in the doorway in a black robe, her face like carved marble, Soo-yeon understood before a single word was spoken. She sat on the living room floor and screamed. Not the kind of scream that performance produces. The kind that comes from a place in the body that has no name. Her mother knelt beside her and held her, and for a long moment they were just two women crying on a marble floor, the sound bouncing off the high ceilings of a house that suddenly felt like a museum. Where was he? Soo-yeon asked, when the screaming had softened to something quieter. Her mother paused. Just a fraction of a second, just enough. He collapsed, Seoyeon said carefully, at a business dinner. Soo-yeon looked at her mother's face and filed the hesitation away without fully understanding why. The official story, released through family representatives and confirmed by the initial medical report, was cardiac arrest. Choi Jae-won had suffered a sudden heart attack. He was 53 years old, had worked 17-hour days for most of his adult life, and operated in one of the world's most high-pressure business environments. The narrative wrote itself. Lagos mourned him the way it mourned its giants, loudly, briefly, and then moved on. The funeral was attended by everyone who mattered: government ministers, bankers, fellow entrepreneurs, pastors. His business associates flew in from Seoul. His lawyers arrived with briefcases. His rivals came to pay their respects and quietly calculate what his absence meant for the market. And through it all, Su-yeon sat in the front row beside her mother, wearing black, her face a mask of composed grief, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes watching everything and everyone, with an intensity that was unusual in a 16-year-old. She noticed, for instance, that one of her uncles, her father's younger brother Choi, Min-jun, did not cry. Min-jun had worked in the company for 12 years, always 3 steps behind his older brother, always smiling in the right moments and disappearing in the wrong ones. At the funeral, he stood with his hands behind his back, his expression respectful but controlled. And Su-yeon noticed that his eyes kept drifting toward the lawyers. She noticed, too, that her mother's behavior was strange in a way she could not articulate. Seo-yeon grieved with perfect timing, tears in the right moments, composure in others. But there was something mechanical about it. Like a woman performing grief, she had already processed privately, long before the event itself. But what occupied the largest space in Su-yeon's mind was Emeka. Emeka Okafor had entered her life 8 months earlier, in the most ordinary way imaginable. Through Adaze. Adaze Okafor was Su-yeon's closest friend at Lagos British International, the girl who had taught her how to navigate the social landscape of elite Lagos, how to laugh at herself when classmates made jokes about her Korean heritage, how to hold her head up in a room where she was always visibly different. Adaze was warm, funny, fiercely protective of her friends, and absolutely devoted to her older brother. Emeka Okafor was 22 years old when Su-yeon first met him. He was the son of Chief Obiora Okafor, one of the most influential political figures in the southeast geopolitical zone. A man whose financial interests were woven through government contracts, real estate, and international trade with the kind of quiet invisibility that only the most powerful people in Nigeria managed to achieve. Emeka had studied economics at UCL in London, returned to Lagos 6 months earlier, and was already being positioned by his father's political machine as the next face of Okafor influence. He was tall, impossibly still, the kind of man who never seemed rushed. His voice was low and deliberate, and he spoke in complete sentences. And when he looked at you, he looked at you completely, as if you were the only thing worth paying attention to in the room. Su-yeon, who had grown up around powerful men and was deeply suspicious of charm, should have recognized the performance. She did not. She was 16, and grieving a version of her family that she was beginning to suspect had never quite existed. And Emeka made her feel seen in a way that felt like water in a dry season. They began talking at a family dinner at the Okafor compound. Adaeze had invited Su-yeon, and Emeka had been there, and they had ended up in the garden talking for 2 hours while the party happened around them. He asked her about Korea, not in the clumsy, stereotypical way her classmates sometimes did, but with genuine curiosity. He asked her what it was like to exist between 2 cultures. He listened to her answers with his full attention. He shared things about himself, the weight of his father's expectations, the loneliness of being brilliant in a family where brilliance was assumed rather than celebrated. By the time Adaze came to find them, Su-yeon was already somewhere she would find it very difficult to leave. What she did not know was that Emeka had been watching her family for much longer than 8 months. Chief Obiora Okafor's political interests had for years depended on certain government contracts in the Lagos construction sector. Contracts that Choi Dae-won's company had consistently won through competitive bidding processes that the chief's people could neither corrupt nor circumvent. Jae-won's reputation for refusing kickbacks was not just moral principle. It was a business strategy that made his bids unbeatable in any transparent evaluation process. And this had cost Chief Okafor's political network real money, real influence, and real power over these years. The chief had tried approaching Jae-won directly 3 times, twice through intermediaries, once in a face-to-face meeting at the Federal Executive Council level. Each time, Jae-won had been polite, firm, and completely immovable. He would not share contracts. He would not inflate figures for a cut. He would not allow ghost workers on his sites. He was, in the language of Nigerian political deal-making, impossible to do business with. Chief Okafor had a son who was charming, patient, and completely willing to do what his father could not. When Emeka first suggested the idea, his father had looked at him for a long time across the dinner table without speaking. Then he had smiled, slowly, the way men smile when they recognize in their children something they had hoped for, but never asked for directly. "You are sure about this?" the chief had asked. "She is lonely," Emeka had said simply, "and her father is not as untouchable as he thinks." The plan was elegant in its patience. Get close to the daughter, build trust, gain access to the family. And at the right moment, when the inheritance was in play, when the legal structure of JW Constructions could be influenced through family relationships and political pressure, position the Okafor family to absorb what Choi Jae-won had spent 17 years building. The socialite was part of the plan too. Her name was Funmi Adeyemi, 28 years old, ambitious, connected, and recruited through a chain of mutual acquaintances that led, if you traced it carefully, back to a man who worked for a communications consulting firm that had done business with the Okafor family. Funmi was not a killer. She did not know she was carrying anything dangerous. She was told she was being introduced to a wealthy man who liked beautiful women in private meetings. She was told the champagne was a gift. She did not know that the bottle had been handled before it reached her. The poison was tasteless. It mimicked cardiac arrest with enough accuracy to fool an initial post-mortem examination. It was the kind of knowledge that required access to very specific expertise, the kind of expertise that existed in certain circles where money and ambition converged, and where questions were never asked because everyone involved understood that the answers were none of their business. Choi Jae-won had drunk 2 glasses of champagne that evening. By midnight, he was gone. If you are still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comment section. Soo-yeon spent the first 2 weeks after her father's death in a kind of suspended grief. She went through the motions, the condolence visits, the meetings with lawyers, the quiet dinners with her mother where neither of them said much. She cried when she needed to, and held herself together when she needed to do that too. But underneath the grief, something else was growing. A small, persistent instinct that kept pulling at her attention like a thread that doesn't quite fit the pattern of the fabric around it. It started with a phone call she was not supposed to hear. She had been walking down the corridor toward the kitchen at 2 in the morning unable to sleep, when she heard her mother's voice coming through the gap beneath the study door. Low. Urgent. In a register Soo-yeon had never heard her mother use before. "You need to be more careful," Seo-yeon was saying. "If they run a full toxicology report—" A pause. Whoever was on the other end was speaking. "I know what I said," her mother continued. "But this is different now. This is my daughter's future." Another pause. "Minjun, I am not asking. I am telling you. Handle it." Soo-yeon stood in the corridor for a long moment after the call ended. The marble floor was cold beneath her bare feet. She turned around and walked back to her room without going to the kitchen. She lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling and turned the word over in her mind, like a stone she was afraid to look under. Toxicology. She did not say anything to anyone. Not yet. She went to school the next day. She ate. She smiled when smiling was required. She texted Emeka that evening, and he responded with warmth and attention, asking how she was holding up, telling her he was there for her, that grief was a process, that she was stronger than she knew. She read his message 3 times and felt the familiar comfort of his attention. And then she put her phone down and made herself ask the question she had been avoiding. Why was a man her mother's age calling her mother at 2 a.m? Why was her mother speaking about a toxicology report with the urgency of someone who knew what such a report might find? And why had her uncle Minjun not cried at the funeral? Soo-yeon was not a detective. She was a 16-year-old girl who had grown up watching her father move through the world with the precision of an engineer, someone who believed in evidence, in structures, in things that could be measured and proven. Some of that had clearly passed to her. She began quietly and carefully to look. She found the first inconsistency in her father's financial records. She had access to a shared family cloud folder that her father had set up years ago for document storage. Tax records, property deeds, company registration documents. She had never had reason to look at them closely before. Now she did. And in a folder dated 2 months before her father's death, she found correspondence between her father and a Lagos law firm. A series of emails about a proposed amendment to the company's Articles of Association that would protect JW Constructions from external acquisition in the event of the founder's death. Her father had initiated this process. But the final amendment had never been filed. The process had been halted by a letter from her father's legal representative citing a scheduling conflict. The letter was dated 1 week before his death, and the signature at the bottom did not quite match her father's handwriting in the other documents she had seen over the years. She sat with this for 4 days. Then she did something that required more courage than she had known she possessed. She went to her father's office, not the main JW Constructions headquarters in Victoria Island, but the private office he had maintained in their home, the one with the teak desk and the framed photographs of Korean landscapes, and the filing cabinet that her mother had not yet cleared out. She went in at 9 a.m. when her mother was at the shipping terminal. She went through every file she could find. She found a letter, handwritten, from her father to himself, the kind of private memo that some men write when they are trying to think through something they cannot say out loud. It was dated 3 months before his death, and it read, in part, "I know what O wants. He has made it plain through 3 different channels. I will not give it to him. But I am beginning to wonder how long he will accept no for an answer. Note for the lawyers. The amendment must be filed before the end of the quarter. Oh Soo-yeon read the letter twice. Then she folded it very carefully and put it in the pocket of her school uniform. She thought about Amika. She thought about his calm eyes and his careful questions and the way he had appeared in her life exactly when she was most vulnerable. She thought about the fact that his last name was Okafor. And she thought about a conversation she had half overheard at one of the condolence visits between 2 of her father's business partners. Something about a deal that Chief Okafor had been pushing for years that her father had repeatedly refused. She did not cry. She went very still. That evening, Emeka called her. He wanted to take her to dinner. Somewhere private, he said. Somewhere she could breathe. He was worried about her. He could hear in her voice that she was carrying too much. She listened to everything he said. She said yes. At dinner, she watched him in a way she had never watched him before. Not with the eyes of someone in love, with the eyes of someone measuring. He was as warm as always, as attentive, as careful. He touched her hand across the table. He said all the right things. And Soo-yeon, who was perhaps the most alone she had ever been in her life, wanted desperately to believe every word. But she had her father's letter in her uniform pocket, and she had her father's engineer's brain in her head. And she knew, the way you know things you are not ready to act on yet, that the man sitting across from her had not appeared in her life by accident. She said nothing. She smiled. She let him believe she was still his. Back at the mansion, the quiet war over the JW Constructions empire was already underway. Min-jun had wasted no time. Within 3 weeks of his brother's death, he had convened a meeting of the company's board of directors, citing his position as deputy director and his shares in the company, and had begun pushing for a reorganization of the executive structure. He framed it as stabilization. The company needed leadership, he argued. Seo-yeon was brilliant, but her expertise was maritime, not construction. He was the most qualified person in the room. He presented a 10-page proposal with projected earnings and a transition timeline. What he had not expected was his sister-in-law's response. Seo-yeon walked into that boardroom in a slate-gray blazer with a folder of her own, sat down at the head of the table, and dismantled Min-jun's proposal with the kind of surgical precision that reminded every person in that room exactly why she had built a successful empire independently of her husband. She cited the company bylaws. She cited the Articles of Association. She cited the provisions her husband had put in place specifically to prevent hostile internal reorganization. She left Min-jun with exactly nothing to work with and looked at him across the table with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Min-jun smiled tightly and accepted the outcome gracefully. He had expected some resistance. He was patient. He had other moves. What neither of them knew was that the toxicology report, the comprehensive one, ordered by the insurance company as standard procedure for a life policy of Jaewon size, had come back with results that the family's lawyer had buried quietly on instructions he had been paid very well to follow. But buried did not mean destroyed, and the insurance company had their own investigators. The investigator's name was Eze Nwosu. He was a former police detective, Lagos State CID, who had gone private 8 years ago and now worked for 3 of the largest insurance firms in Nigeria. He was 44 years old, methodical, quietly spoken, and completely immune to the kind of social pressure that the Okafor name usually generated. He had seen the toxicology results. He had noted the discrepancy between the initial cause of death and the chemical markers in the bloodstream. He had begun making calls. One of those calls found its way through a chain of professional contacts to Su Yan's school counselor, who called Su Yan into her office on a Tuesday afternoon and, in the careful language of someone trying to protect a child while also respecting a legal process, told her that someone was looking into her father's death, that the initial report might not be the complete picture, and that if Su Yan had any information that she felt was relevant, there were people who would want to hear it. Su Yan walked out of that office into the bright Lagos afternoon and stood by the school gate for a long time. The sun was hitting the bougainvillea on the wall, and the traffic on the road outside was doing what Lagos traffic always did, and somewhere in the city, her mother was running a shipping empire, and her uncle was plotting a boardroom takeover, and the boy she had thought loved her was engineering the theft of everything her father had built. And her father, her brilliant, complicated, flawed, loving father, was gone. She called Izinwosu's number that evening from her bedroom with the door locked. She told him everything she had found. The letter, the halted amendment, the phone call she had overheard, the name Okafor. Her voice did not shake. She had her father's precision and her mother's composure, and she used both of them completely. "You are very brave," Isis said, when she had finished. "I am not brave," Su Yan said. "I just want the truth. Now, before we go any further, ladies, and especially the women watching this story, let me ask you, do you feel sorry for Choi Jae-won? This man who built towers across Lagos, who refused corruption, who loved his daughter fiercely. He also repeatedly betrayed the woman who followed him across the world and built her own empire beside him. He died in a hotel room with another woman while his wife and daughter slept in that orchid mansion alone. Do you still feel sorry for him? Or do you believe that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed without consequence? Let us know what you think in the comments. This is a real question, and we want to hear from you. The investigation moved quickly once Izinwosu had Su Yan's information to cross-reference with his own. The toxicology report confirmed the presence of a substance that should not have been in Choi Jae-won's system, a compound that was not part of any natural cardiac event, but rather something introduced through ingestion, most probably through liquid, consumed in the hours before death. The champagne bottle from the hotel suite had been removed during the initial investigation, but the hotel's CCTV showed a room service delivery at 9:47 p.m. A delivery ordered from a number that traced back to a prepaid SIM registered to a name that did not exist, purchased at a phone shop in Surulere 3 weeks before the death. The woman, Funmi Adeyemi, cooperated fully with investigators. She had not known what was in the champagne. She had been given the bottle by a man she knew professionally, a music industry contact she identified only as Lanre, who told her it was a premium vintage, a gift for the evening. She had not questioned it. She described Lanre in detail. Ezenwosu ran the description against known associates of the Okafor political network. The match took 11 hours. The chain from Lanre to Emeka was not direct. It was constructed with the kind of deliberate distance that suggested careful planning. Two intermediaries, a communications consulting firm, and a third party who managed logistics for events connected to the Okafor family's social calendar. But chains are still chains, and chains, when you find one end, eventually lead you to where they are anchored. When Emeka Okafor was questioned by investigators, initially informally, then formally, his composure was remarkable. He denied everything. He expressed grief on behalf of his friend's family. He offered to cooperate fully. He called his father's lawyers within 20 minutes of the formal questioning beginning. Chief Obiora Okafor issued a statement through his office calling the investigation politically motivated and expressing confidence in his son's innocence. The family's legal team was formidable, well-connected, and extremely expensive. But Su Yan had given the investigators something they could not have found on their own. Her father's private letter. The letter naming O. The letter explicitly referencing the pressure Jae-won had been under from a named party with a clear financial motive to want him gone. Combined with the toxicology report, the CCTV evidence, the chain of communication leading back to an Okafor associate, and the testimony of two board members who confirmed that approaches had been made to JW Constructions in the month following Jae-won's death. The picture that emerged was not a theory. It was a structure, precise, documented, and devastating. The morning the arrest warrant was issued for Emeka Okafor, Su Yan was sitting in the kitchen of the Victoria Island mansion eating toast. Her mother came in and sat across from her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The morning light came through the window and hit the orchids in the garden, and everything looked exactly as it always had, and yet nothing was the same, and both of them knew it. "You went to investigators," Seo-yeon said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. "Yes," Soo-yeon said. "You found the letter." "Yes." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father would have been proud of you." Soo-yeon looked at her mother carefully. "Would he have been proud of you?" she asked. The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into water. Her mother did not look away. She held her daughter's gaze with the steadiness of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this moment and had prepared herself for it. "I made choices," Seo-yeon said quietly. "I am not proud of all of them. But I want you to understand everything. Not the version that protects anyone, including me." She told her then, sitting in the kitchen with the orchids outside and the morning light on the table. She told her daughter the truth that had been buried under the weight of 17 years of a complicated marriage, that in the years when Jae-won's infidelity had become a pattern she could no longer pretend was an aberration. She had turned, in her loneliness and her anger, to someone she should not have turned to. Min-jun, her husband's younger brother, a man who had loved her quietly and badly for years, and had used her vulnerability in that moment to something that damaged them both. The affair had been brief, less than a year. She had ended it herself, but it had left something behind a secret, a debt, and a piece of leverage that Min Jun had held with a gentleness that was more threatening than any explicit demand. The phone call Su Yan had overheard, the one about the toxicology report, was Min Jun warning her that if the investigation went too deep, certain things might surface that would complicate not just the legal picture, but the family's entire foundation. Seo Yan had been trying to protect Su Yan. She had been trying to protect the company. She had been operating under the assumption that grief had its own cover, that if they managed the narrative carefully enough, if the toxicology report stayed buried, if Min Jun stayed quiet, they could absorb the loss of Jaiwan without also losing everything else. But her daughter had pulled the thread, and now everything was unraveling, and Seo Yon, who had spent 17 years holding things together with sheer force of will, finally allowed herself to come undone, just slightly, just for a moment. In the kitchen where the orchids were blooming and the morning was bright, and her daughter was looking at her with eyes that held grief and love, and something that had not finished forming yet. "Am I his daughter?" Su Yan asked. The question came out very quietly. Her mother closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. "No," she said. "Biologically, no. But Su Yan, your father knew. He found out when you were 3 years old. And he chose to love you anyway. He chose you every single day after that. What he felt for you was not obligation. It was love. The choice kind. The kind that means more than blood." Su Yan sat with this for a very long time. The toast had gone cold. The light had shifted. Outside, a bird was doing something complicated in the orchids. "And Min Jun?" she said eventually. "He used that against you." "He tried," her mother said. "But I am not easily used." There was something in the way she said it that made Su Yan look at her mother, really look at her. For the first time in weeks. And what she saw was not the composed, precise woman she had always known. She saw someone who had been fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously, carrying more weight than anyone in the house had understood, and still standing, still making decisions, still protecting the thing she valued most, which was her daughter's future. Min Jun's own reckoning came within 48 hours of Emeka Okafor's arrest, when it became clear that the investigation was not going to stay neatly contained to the Okafor angle, that investigators were following all threads, including the halted amendment filing and the suspicious signature. Min Jun moved first. He went to investigators voluntarily, with his own lawyers, and offered information about the amendment process in exchange for consideration. What he revealed confirmed what Su Yan had suspected, that the amendment had been halted deliberately, that he had arranged it through the legal representative he controlled, and that he had been positioning himself to step into a vacuum created by his brother's death. He had not known about the poison. He had not been part of Emeka's plan. He had been running his own parallel scheme, the way secondary predators sometimes move in after the primary damage is done. Not causing the disaster, but positioning to profit from it. The investigators treated these as separate matters. Legally, they were. Morally, in the family's reckoning, they were not. Min Jun was removed from the JW Constructions Board. He left Lagos 3 months later and did not return. The case against Emeka Okafor moved through the Lagos legal system with the grinding deliberateness of a process dealing with a defendant whose family had considerable resources and considerable motivation to slow everything down. Chief Okafor deployed his full political and legal arsenal. Hearings were delayed. Evidence was challenged. Character witnesses were produced. The defense argued that the chain of evidence linking Emeka to the poison was circumstantial, inferential, insufficient. The prosecution countered with the financial motive, the communication chain, and the letter her father had written, the letter that named O, with a clarity that no defense lawyer could fully explain away. Su-Yan testified. She sat in a courtroom in Lagos, 16 years old, in a white blouse, with her mother 2 rows behind her. And she told the truth in complete sentences, without drama, without embellishment, exactly as her father's daughter would have done. She described finding the letter. She described the phone call she had overheard. She described the timeline she had reconstructed from the documents in the cloud folder. She described Emeka, not with bitterness, but with a precision that was more devastating than bitterness would have been. A girl who loved someone, she said, does not need to hate him to tell the truth about what he did. Emeka looked at her once during her testimony. His expression, for the first time since she had known him, was not controlled. It was something she could not fully name, not guilt exactly, not regret exactly, but something adjacent to both. Something that happened in a face when the performance finally costs too much to maintain. She did not look back at him. He was convicted. Not on the highest charge. The evidence for direct, personal involvement in the act itself remained inferential, and the defense successfully argued that the chain connecting him to Lanre was not proved beyond reasonable doubt on the most serious count. But on conspiracy to commit harm, on obstruction, on financial crimes connected to the attempted takeover of JW Constructions, on those charges, the evidence held. He was sentenced to 11 years. Chief Okafor's political career did not survive the trial. Adayezi, who had been kept in the dark about her brother's plans and whose devastation was real and complete, sent Su-Yan a single message the day the verdict was delivered. The message said, "I am sorry. I did not know. I hope one day you can believe that." Su-Yan read it 3 times. She did not respond immediately. She put the phone down and walked into the garden and stood among her mother's orchids and thought about the difference between being used and being deceived, and whether the people who were deceived deserved the same grace as the people who were simply unlucky. She was not sure yet. She was 17 now. She had time to figure it out. The legal protection of JW Constructions, the amendment her father had initiated and that Minjun had halted, was refiled and approved within 6 months of the trial's conclusion, this time with a full legal team that Seo-Yan selected personally and watched like a hawk through every step of the process. The company remained intact. The empire remained. The towers that J1 had built still rose against the Lagos skyline, and his name was still on the buildings, and his daughter's name was written into the legal structure of the company he had loved, second only to her. But in that Victoria Island mansion, in the evenings, when the orchids were lit by the last of the Lagos sunset, and the harbor was doing what harbors do, moving, always moving, cargo and water and the accumulated ambition of a city that never rests. Su-Yan and her mother sat sometimes in the garden and did not speak. They did not need to. The silence between them had changed from something full of secrets to something full of understanding. And that was a different thing entirely. That was the beginning of something, rather than the end. There were things Su-Yan had not fully processed yet. The fact that the man she had called her father all her life had known the truth about her biology and chosen her anyway. That was something she turned over daily, like a stone with multiple sides, each one showing her something different depending on the light. Some days it made her feel loved beyond measure. Some days it made her wonder who she was when you removed the certainties she had built herself on. Most days, it made her think about the difference between the love you are born into and the love someone chooses. And she thought that the chosen kind might be the braver kind, the kind that cost something, and that cost might be exactly what made it mean something. She thought about her father's flaw, the infidelity that had fractured his marriage, that had driven her mother into the arms of a man who would use that vulnerability against her, that had created the network of secrets and pressures and quiet devastation that Emeka Okafor had studied and exploited with the precision of someone who had been watching for exactly that kind of weakness. Jae-woon's infidelity had not caused his death directly, but it had created conditions. It had opened doors, and the man who walked through those doors had known exactly which ones to push. Power and love and ambition and betrayal do not operate in isolation. They find each other. They use each other. And the people caught in the middle, the daughters, the wives, the friends who did not know, pay prices they did not agree to pay for choices that were never theirs to make. Su-Yan was 17, and she understood this now in a way that would shape every decision she made for the rest of her life. She was not broken by it. She was not hardened by it either, not in the way that fear hardens people. She was sharpened. She was precise. She was her father's daughter in the ways that mattered, in the refusal to be bought, in the belief in evidence, in the commitment to building things that last. And she was her mother's daughter in the ways that mattered too, in the resilience, in the strategy, in the understanding that the world is full of people who will mistake your warmth for weakness, and that the wisest response to that mistake is not to become cold, but to become unmistakably clear. There was still the matter of what came next. Because Chief Obiora Okafor, whose political career had been destroyed by the trial, was not a man who accepted loss quietly. He had resources that did not depend on political office. He had alliances that were older and deeper than anything a court verdict could touch. And in the weeks after his son's sentencing, people who paid attention to such things, people in Lagos boardrooms, people in government corridors, people who moved through the city's invisible power structures, began to notice that the chief was having certain kinds of meetings, with certain kinds of people, in certain kinds of places. Someone wanted JW Constructions. Someone had wanted it for a long time, and the loss of one instrument, one son, did not mean the goal had changed. It only meant that new instruments would need to be found. Seo Yan knew this. She had known it since the trial ended, and she watched Chief Okafor walk out of that courtroom with his lawyers and his stone face and his absolute refusal to display anything that might be interpreted as defeat. She had her own people paying attention. She had her own network, built over 17 years in Lagos maritime shipping, that was capable of gathering intelligence in the quiet spaces where the city's real decisions were made. She said nothing to Su-Yan about this yet. Her daughter had carried enough. There would be time. There would always be more. This was Lagos. This was power. And power in a city like this is not a conclusion. It is a conversation that never really ends. It only changes speakers. But for now, for this moment, in the garden with the orchids and the last of the evening light, Su-Yan was here, and she was alive, and she was clear-eyed, and she was whole in the ways that mattered. And Seo-Yan looked at her daughter and thought that Jae-won, wherever he was, would see this girl and know that some things he built were stronger than any tower. And somewhere in Lagos, in the places where ambition and money meet in the dark, something was already moving toward them. They did not know yet what it was. But Su-Yan, her father's daughter, her mother's heir, was watching. And this time, she would be ready. What would you have done in her place? If the person you loved had been an instrument of your father's murder, could you have sat in that courtroom and told the truth without flinching? Could you have looked at your mother and understood, really understood, the choices she made in her loneliness, and chosen grace over anger? Or would you have chosen differently? Leave your answer in the comments. This story is about power and betrayal and love used as a weapon, and we want to know how you would have navigated it. If this story kept you company from beginning to end, then you already know what to do. Click subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Because the next story we are bringing you goes even deeper into the Lagos power structure, into the invisible hands that control empires from behind closed curtains, and into what happens when the people who thought they were safe discover they never were. Like this video. Share it with someone who loves a story with real stakes and real lessons. We will see you in the next one.